Welcome to r/MaliciousCompliance, where we share stories of people conforming to the letter but not the spirit of a request. And today's first story is, Karen wants me to weigh her candy at the movie theater. Having worked during college at the local movie theater, I came across all kinds of Karens. In this particular case, Karen went to the movies with her two kids, around the ages of 4 to 5. As you guys know, movie theaters have high prices for snacks and drinks. It was Sunday morning, and usually this is a busy time with a lot of small children and kids' movies. It's obvious that I'm dealing with a total Karen straight from the start, keeping on her sunglasses, chewing gum, and being on her phone the entire time she's waiting in line. When it's her turn, I think to myself, Javonde P&L, your shift just started. Just be nice and maybe this will all go over smoothly. It didn't. Karen is annoyed by the prices of the tickets. You can buy the tickets and your snacks at the same register, and is not happy with the assortment of healthy snacks. I'm still there trying to keep up my best smile, like I'm the effing Joker in a low-budget Batman movie, but I'm getting through her order. Now for the little children. As they were acting like dogs running around the place, I will name them like dogs. So child 1 is Ollie, child 2 is Rex. Note, where I'm from we have a display where you can scoop your own candy in a bag for a fixed price per 100 grams, 3.5 ounces. Being a movie theater, this is crazy expensive, and a full bag can cost around 16 euros, or $17.5. Ollie, Mommy, can we scoop some candy? Karen, how much for the candy? Me, it's €1.50 per 100 grams. Karen, yes, Ollie, hurry up with the candy. Rex, Mom, I want some candy too. Karen, Ollie, help your brother get his candy. At this point, she already spent way too much time in line. Normally, you scoop the candy before you make your purchase to prevent that the transaction takes an extremely long time, and we can help other customers. Not for Miss Karen, though. She just goes back to texting on her phone. I'm baffled, annoyed, and just want to go help other customers because the movie is starting in 15 minutes and the lines for the registers are not moving at all. So me, the good Samaritan that I am, try to eyeball the bag of candy Ollie has so that I can get a rough estimate how much all the candy will cost. To my enjoyment, I see the kid with an enormous bag of candy almost the size of his head. So I estimated that it will be around 15 euros. Rex's bag isn't that full, but he's still scooping, and I think to myself, realistically the price will be higher, but I just want this to be over and I don't want to overprice them. Me, the total will be 44 euros. Karen, what? Why is it so expensive? Me, Miss, the candy weighs a lot, and the price? Karen, but you didn't even weigh it. You're just trying to rip me off. Weigh it and give me the correct price, she says as she grabs the bags from Ollie and Rex. Well, she was correct. I didn't weigh it, but I wasn't trying to rip her off. Heck, I was giving her a huge discount. So I smile to her and grab the bags of candy and put them on the scale. I can see the price and so can the customer. Me, sure miss, as you can see the price of the candy costs 24 euros, so your total will be 53 euros. So of course Karen gets angry and wants me to call the manager because I'm still ripping her off. The manager comes along, weighs the candy, and confirms that the correct price is 53 euros. Because you have to pay the candy when you grab it because of hygiene rules and there's a big effing sign, Karen eventually buys everything and walks away angry with her kids. Luckily for me, the manager was a nice dude, so I didn't get into trouble for guessing the weight, and at the end of the shift I was glad I could ruin a movie experience for a Karen. The second story is Malicious Compliance for a math teacher who failed me the year before, aka the last time he asked me to show more work. This story is kinda long, because the malicious compliance was the result of over a year of frustration and anger, and the effects are still present 10 plus years later. I was your typical obnoxious teen my freshman year of high school. I was smart but had an unstable home life that contributed to my poor decision making. Despite my lack of learning and hard work, I had always barely passed my classes. My first year in high school, I had math for my first period. I enjoyed math but frustrated my teacher by rarely doing my work, and even less frequently showing my work. As the year progressed, I fell behind like I did in every class. The second half of the year started, and I fell further behind in class and more annoyed with my math teacher. I would typically submit about 10% of each assignment and expect about 10% credit, but because I did not show enough work, he would dock me down to 5%. Despite always being polite, I may have been a sucky student, but I couldn't stand disruptive or impolite students. My feelings toward him were obvious, and when I tried to talk to him about my assignments, it was clear he was also annoyed with me. About 3 months before the end of the year, my sister developed senioritis, which affected me because she was my ride to school. For those who don't know, senioritis is when senior students know they're done with high school. Either they know they're going to pass their classes or they've been accepted to college, etc., so they stop caring. Instead of being good students, they decide to do the bare minimum because at this point nothing in high school really matters. She did not want to go to her first period class, so she started ditching, resulting in me ditching. Initially, I opposed it, but as my frustration with my math teacher increased, so did my absences. Towards the end of the year, I thought I had time to catch up when my teacher ended up reaching his limit. He was frustrated with me and my absences and lack of work that when I was so behind, I had no hope of passing. He got me removed from class for the remainder of the year. I ended up in study hall, detention, for the last 3 weeks. I had to repeat the course the following year instead of over summer school because it was an honors class. This resulted in me having a weird schedule because classes were only offered during certain periods for certain grades, and I was a sophomore with freshman classes. I might have also failed honors science. Despite knowing those restrictions, both me and my math teacher were surprised to find that I was placed in his class for the second year in a row. Both of us tried to have me transferred out of his class, but for me to graduate on time, there was no other options. The humiliation of my previous year was enough to make me incredibly motivated. I was determined to do well enough that even if he hated me, he could not have me removed again. I made sure to do every problem for every assignment and turn them in on time. Despite all my effort, my grades were mediocre. My teacher only gave 1 point for the correct answer, but typically 5 to 7 points for work, and he marked me down all the time. I talked to him, argued that I showed enough work for him to follow, but no matter what I tried, all he would do was tell me to show more work. A large part of the reason I hated showing work was because I had terrible handwriting. I previously went to a school that required all of our writing to be done in cursive, so I spent 5 years only writing in cursive. I actually enjoyed writing in cursive, and my cursive is beautiful. When we moved for my dad's job, my new school district gave cursive assignments automatic zeros because they were too hard to read. So after years of writing in cursive, assuming I'd never need to print again, I now had to print everything, and my handwriting never recovered. As a result, to submit legible assignments, I tried to write as little as possible. My handwriting is still ugly. After my grades on the first test did not match what I felt I earned, my frustration grew into outright hostility. It seemed that no amount of hard work would get me a good grade. I finally decided that if I was going to be miserable, I would make my teacher miserable too. After trying to spare him the atrocity that was my handwriting, I finally decided to comply. If he wanted to see more of my work, I would show him all the work. No more would I remove confusing and ugly work. No longer would I erase incorrect attempts scribbled across the page because my handwriting was so bad I couldn't write straight. No longer would I rewrite only the relevant work in easy-to-follow columns. I would write so much work it would be obscene. I started writing out every single possible step, one by one with labels. If I messed up, I would leave it and rewrite it somewhere else. On every worksheet, I would run out of the allotted room and cram my remaining work into the margins because he did not believe in scrap paper. My assignments went from a few formulas and legible bits of work to cluttered nightmares. Every bit of white space was filled, often spilling onto the back of the paper because there was not any room left. Homework assignments went from being 2 to 3 pages to 10 to 15 pages, sometimes more. All of my assignments were just pages and pages of nearly illegible, ugly, chaotic work. I figured it would take a month of this before he broke and asked me to write less because reading and grading it was such a chore. About 3 weeks in, I got my first assignment back. It was higher than any other grade I had received in his class. I was a little shocked, but figured he didn't have time to be annoyed yet. During the following week, all the assignments I received were scored similarly. Then he finished grading the second test and asked me to come talk to me about my grade. I was preparing my speech about malicious compliance as I sat down in the chair by his desk, but decided to wait for him to speak first. He handed me my test. It was covered in chaotic work, equations, and letters all over. At the top was 100%. I was stunned into silence. I had never gotten a perfect score on a real test before. My teacher began to talk to me about how impressed he had been with my work lately. He pointed out how even though my work was chaotic, it showed my thought process. He also pointed out some of the times where I caught my own mistakes mid-problem and corrected myself, and how on previous assignments I had been doing the same thing. He talked about how before I wrote so little that I typically never recovered once I made a mistake. He told me this was why he did not allow scrap paper. He wanted us to be able to see our mistakes and work as we progress through our problems. I sat in the chair in shock. I had sat in that chair many times previous, typically to try and debate with him over my scores. I also sat in that chair when he told me half a year prior that I had no hope for passing his class. I sat in the chair of someone I had despised for over a year, as he complimented me and told me that he always knew I was capable, and he struggled to watch me fail. He talked about how happy he was to see my progress, and basically that he knew I would do well once I stopped making stupid mistakes. I wrote down all the steps to annoy my teacher and prove him wrong, and learned instead that I was being a bad student. I learned it's easy to make a simple mistake that can lead to the wrong answer, but when you see your work, it helps you think clearly and catch simple mistakes. By the end of the year, I had one of the highest grades in the class. Home life was still crap, and when we did group work, many people wanted to work with me. The math teacher and I became friends. I learned he lived in my neighborhood and would visit him sometimes when I came back to town years later, and he ended up as my favorite teacher of all time. I'm in my last semester of college. Took 10 years because life is crazy, and after this semester I'll graduate as an engineer. I've used this lesson every day for every assignment and would never have made it if I had not tried to punish my teacher with malicious compliance. And the last story is, I can only do my work? Okay. Reading over these stories gave me so much joy, I decided I'd share one of mine. Note, this story is old. I've not been at that job for quite a few years now. Anyway, onward. I used to work for a famous place that dispenses medications. I'm sure many of you have seen one, for more serious chronic conditions. Medications were delivered to patients instead of picked up. That's really the only thing you need to know. I worked in the insurance authorization portion. For non-Americans, that basically means I was responsible for trying to get the insurance coverages to actually pay for the medications many of these people needed to live their lives. Yes, it's stupid and inefficient. And if anyone is familiar with insurance work, you know it's 1, basically thankless, 2, usually involves having to be on the phone a lot, and 3, is always behind. Number 3 is the important part. Supervisors at the job didn't like me much because I questioned a lot of stuff and tried to make things more efficient. However, because of their own rules and metrics, they couldn't really ding me on a lot of stuff because I always perform well in performance reviews. Perhaps that's also a form of malicious compliance? Now to the part where the malicious compliance comes in. My supervisors and I weren't exactly pals, a story for another time, but many of my coworkers absolutely loved me, and whenever I could help out with their workloads, I would. For most of my time there, I did my own work, helped out 2 other coworkers with their blessing, helped out other coworkers when they complained about being overwhelmed, and managed to keep fully abreast on all the work. One day though, Supervisor A came to me and said, "Hey, Yarn and Metal, you need to focus on your own work." "What do you mean, Supervisor A? I'm completely caught up and waiting on a lot of responses." "You need to stop helping your coworkers out, Yarn and Metal. They've got their work assigned, you've got yours. Just focus on what you've got." "Okay, Supervisor A, you want me to focus on my own stuff? You got it." I warned the coworkers I was helping that Supervisor A was telling me not to help them anymore, transferred all the work I'd helped with back to the original owners, and spent time working on writing things down with pen and paper. Not 2 days later, Supervisor A and her counterpart Supervisor B came in and were questioning my coworkers about why their workloads were suddenly so much larger. Several of them apparently gave the same answer. Yarn and Metal was helping keep our queues lowered. A day after that, we went into mandatory overtime because things had gotten too busy for regular hours. Both supervisors walked by my desk several times. Open floor desk plans are the worst. But since I was demurely either writing something down by hand or had my own work queue conspicuously open to where they could indeed see I was fully caught up with everything typically assigned to me, they were not able to say a single word. I'm so glad I'm out of that job now. Bonus is that the job paid me for several hours of work, where I was actually writing down story ideas, grocery lists, to-do lists, and getting my resume in order. Thank you for listening.